welcome to this David Icke Connector videocast. Well, I find it interesting that over the years of doing these videocasts every week, the ones that uncover the problem, which needs uncovering, absolutely should be circulating. That's why I do it all the time. But those get far bigger interest than those that look at what we can do about it, how we can make the world a different reality to the one we are experiencing and would rather it change. Which is a kind of a strange thing, because people are asking for solutions all the time. Okay, so I can see what's going on. So what's the solution? What do we do about it? And when you talk about what can be done about it, the interest is a lot less. And unless we do address that, then all we're going to be doing is exposing more and more of the problem and basically getting nowhere. The problem has to be exposed. People have to know how the world is manipulated and to what end, absolutely. But we also surely need to look at what we can do to turn that around. I think one of the points of resistance for many people is that when I talk about solutions, I'm not talking about protest and getting someone to take minutes and starting an organization. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something much deeper and much more profound. And it can sound to people who are not into this whole arena that I'm talking about today that it's all airy-fairy, esoteric wind. How can I put it? It ain't. It's reversing how we got here. And you can find solutions for problems. And of course, we are drowning in solutions that lead to more problems. It's what politics is there for. Or surely we can do the sensible thing, which is to remove the cause of the problem, and then the problem, by definition, must go away. And when you break it down, it's so simple. It's the difference between being driven by the heart and being driven by the head. And although it is that simple, it's not easy for most people, quite understandably, to move from a head-driven perception to a heart-driven perception, because for the very reason of stopping us doing that, human society has been structured to drive us into the head and to ignore the heart. So if you look at, for instance, what we bravely call the education system, it's all about feeding the head, feeding the intellect. What I would call, and I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who looks at it, programming the head, programming perceptions of reality across the great spectrum of human society. Because once you've got someone's perception and you've got it in a bubble or in a box, then you're controlling their behavior for the rest of their life. Because perceptions of reality become behavior as a result of those perceptions. And another resistance for many people to looking at this absolutely foundation answer to everything is that they still perceive the body to be solid and physical and everything to be apart from everything else. It's not. We are consciousness. We are points of attention within an infinite state of consciousness. And this vehicle, which is not solid as we experience it, I'll grant you that, so do I, but holographic, illusory solid, illusory physical. This is the vehicle through which we experience this reality, which is just a band of frequency with infinity existing beyond its very narrow walls or firewalls of human perception. If you think that the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists in this universe, some say it's a bit more, but not much. It's a tiny, tiny fraction, the electromagnetic spectrum, of this universe. And visible light, which is the only band of frequency that we can see, it's what we call the world, is a smear of that 0.005%. So we don't live in a world, we live in a band of frequency, which appears to be a world. And this body is the vehicle for our awareness to experience this reality. Because if my awareness in its state of frequency wanted to directly interact with this reality, it couldn't. I couldn't, for instance, pick up that pair of glasses because my consciousness, that which is experiencing through the body, is in a completely different frequency to those glasses. Therefore, just as two radio stations pass each other in the same space without interfering with each other unless they're close on the dial, so my consciousness cannot directly pick up the glasses. So I couldn't interact from that level of no-form consciousness with this world. So we take on an outer shell, if you like, which is not really a shell, it's a field of information, waveform field of information, a bit like Wi-Fi, if you like. And we, therefore, have an outer vehicle that is resonating, vibrating, is within the frequency band that we want to experience, and therefore we can interact with it. I can pick up those glasses. And then at what we call death, the awareness, the true self, the infinite self, the eternal self, which has been experiencing through the vehicle, when the vehicle dies, not the consciousness, the vehicle reaches the end of its cycle sooner or later. Consciousness withdraws from the vehicle and continues its eternal exploration of forever. Forever. So, the question then comes, where are we going to get our information from to get a fix on the world, the reality that we're experiencing? Well, we can, if we close down our awareness and allow basically our reality to be dictated only by the five senses. Can I touch it, see it, taste it, hear it, etc.? Then it must exist. And if I can't, it doesn't exist. Possible. Well, it is, actually. If we come from that direction, then where is that information going to come from? To the five senses and to the brain interacting with the five senses. It's going to come from this reality. It's going to come from within the smear of 0.005%. And who's going to control that information? Who does control it currently? The mainstream media, Silicon Valley, education, mainstream medicine, mainstream science. They control that information from which we get our perceptions, from which comes our behavior. And the brain is not where our consciousness comes from. It is an extraordinary computer system, in effect, which processes information. And if that information comes from these this world sources of information alone, the five sense sources of information that we see all the time, then it's going to process that information into a perception of reality. But if we expand and open our minds from just five sense reality, and we allow it to expand beyond this smear of 0.005%, indeed beyond the 0.005%, then we can start to access information, inspiration, intuition, knowing that is not of the five sense world. And thus, suddenly, you start to have a radar. First of all, you have a radar on which to process, an antenna to process the information that you're receiving from the five senses. And I can tell you, having been through this whole process about 30 years ago, and ongoing, it's always ongoing, that once you burst through that five sense perception of everything, which is what I did in 1990-91, and that's what happened to me on the Wogan show in, was it 1991, when I was talking and people were saying he's crazy and I couldn't walk down any street without being laughed at and ridiculed. What was happening to me at that time was I was bursting through this five sense reality bubble. And thus I was starting to perceive things and receive information from outside the bubble, which was like a tidal wave to start with. And it was very difficult to process. And just like a computer freezes when you give it too much information at once, I froze for about 3 months in 1991. But then, when the computer unfroze, I was seeing the world with my feet on the ground again, but in a totally different way. Because I suddenly had a radar. I had another point of observation through which I could perceive this reality. And suddenly, what appeared to be random dots suddenly made patterns. I could see how they connected, could see where it was going. You could see the truth in the white bits between the words that are given to us to tell us what to think. And that process of transformation was, again, quite straightforward in what happened, but not so straightforward in trying to cope with it. And that's, I moved out of my head only into here, the heart. And the human energetic field, the waveform field, which the body is an expression of, has vortex points in it, if anyone's new to this stuff. In the East, they call them chakras or wheels of light. They're vortex points. And the one that is the center vortex, the balance vortex, is in the center of the chest within the human energetic field. And it's known in esoterics as the heart. Not the physical heart or the holographic heart, but the energetic heart. And this connects us into levels of reality, levels of perception, levels of knowledge, awareness, wisdom, understanding, intuition, that this would never do. Because it's only processing information that it receives. And if all it's receiving is information from the five sense world of mainstream everything, then that is what most people will perceive the world to be. What they've been told, because that's what their brain is processing and becoming their perception of reality. But when you move from here to here, this is connecting you with levels of awareness, levels of consciousness that are far beyond this, by comparison, Stone Age-like reality we call the world of the five senses. And you can access information, awareness, wisdom, understanding, intuitive knowing, that you won't only through this. What the system does, it worships the intellect, doesn't it? You pass the exams, oh, he's got a great intellect, she's got a great intellect. Well, all right, but has she got a great consciousness? Has he got a great consciousness? Because they aren't the same in the way that I'm describing it today. And so when you look at the difference between the two, this, if we allow it to open, is accessing levels of awareness that know. This is not accessing those levels of awareness, and thus it has to think and try to work it out because it doesn't know. Look at the body language that most people use. When they say, I'm thinking, where does their hand go? I'm thinking, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. Where do their hands go when they say, I know, I just know? It comes here. I know, I just know. And this is body language indicating where this knowing is coming from. And so in the early 1990s, I started the journey, which is a completely and utterly life-changing journey, from here to here. And everything changed. And of course, when you're coming from here and you're having this be your guide, you are going to perceive things and say things and do things that people here, not that they're inferior people, they're just perceiving reality in a different way. People here are going to look at those people and go, you're bloody mad, mate. You're having a midlife crisis. When actually all you've done is move to another point of awareness, inspiration, knowing. And this conspiracy that I have been exposing all these years, it's becoming more and more obvious. That's why more and more people are opening their minds to it. One of its foundation methods to control the human race has been to close the heart. And when you close the heart, then perception moves completely to the head. And what they then do, and have done, is control the information the brain processes by controlling information. That's why all this censorship's going on now. They want to censor anything that gives the brain alternative information to process and thus come to a different perception, which is bad for the conspiracy. But when you go the other way and you open your heart and you move this point of perception here, then you start to see both the world and yourself in a different way. And the world that we have created is a world created by the head, by the mind. And unless we move out of that, we'll go on just repeating and repeating and repeating what's happened before. If you try to find head solutions for head created problems, that's when you are saying, I've got a solution, which leads to more problems. Einstein said something like, you cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. And that's what we're doing. Head politicians of one party say, we're going to solve the problems of the head politicians of another party. What happens? More problems. The heart is the center of everything in terms of the human experience, and that's why it's been shut down. There was, or is, in California, an organization that's been around for quite some time now, called the Institute of Heart Math, which carries out research into the power of the heart, the influence of the heart, and the nature of the heart. And I'm talking about the energetic heart. And this is some of the things that the Institute of Heart Math Research has discovered. Heart rhythms affect the brain's ability to process information. Because when people think about coming to perception, they think about the brain. I'm thinking, but this is the real power point for perception. And what's happening here is affecting this. The heart field, the electromagnetic field generated by this vortex, is the most powerful in the body. The heart has 40,000 sensory neurons, like the brain, neurons. And this is what they call, in this research, the heart-brain syndrome. Because the heart and the brain should be working together. Information, knowing, feelings of how things are come from the heart and then need to be processed by the brain into action, into putting the whole picture together. But when this is shut down, only this is in the process. Do you know, they found that when the brain and the heart and the central nervous system are in what they call coherence, in other words, they're in balance and harmony, the person goes on to a higher level of consciousness. And when there is an incoherent imbalance in the connection between the heart, the brain, and the central nervous system, the person falls into a lower level of consciousness. And this is how the conspiracy works. It doesn't want the brain and the heart in harmony. It wants them in disharmony, because that brings the human consciousness into a lower level of awareness. Gotcha. So my life changed 30 years ago when I started to move from here to here. And now these kind of work in harmony. You hear this all the time, don't you? What does your head say? What does your heart say? They know there's a difference. I've read accounts of therapists, one who's connected to the Institute of Heart Math, the last time I looked anyway, who've described how they used a technique whereby they put someone in a chair who had emotional problems, life problems, whatever. And they said to them, tell me about your problem from your head. And they did. And then they would, she would symbolically change chairs and have the client put in another chair. And then they'd be asked, tell me your problem from your heart. And the therapist whose account that I read was saying that you would think you are talking to two totally separate people because of how they describe their problems from those two perspectives. The heart and the brain do not see the world, life, problems in the same way. And the one that knows is the one that's targeted by the cabal and its hierarchical system of education and media and all the rest of it. So, how does this affect society all the time? And how would it change society if we changed? Well, first of all, let's look at this cabal that's behind grotesque world events and a nightmare scenario for humanity. Why does it do what it does? Why does it orchestrate wars? Why do people die of hunger in a world of plenty? Why do people sleep in the streets while others have billions, i.e. them? How could anyone possibly orchestrate that or want to? Well, the answer is anyone with this under lock and key. The head will justify anything. It's just processing information. Give it a reason why you should have an economic system in which some people die of hunger and some people have more money than they could spend if they lived to be 1,000. And this will work out and tell you why that's rational. This would go, what are we talking about? We can't have that. I've described, I would say accurately, that this cabal is made up of very extreme psychopaths. What's the number one trait given for psychopaths? No empathy. No ability to put themselves in the feelings and the emotions and the effect of what they're making others experience. And where does empathy come from? From here? From here. And the more you close the heart and move to the head, the more you close down empathy. And empathy is what I call the fail-safe mechanism of human behavior. If you have empathy with what you're making someone else experience, then that will limit what you will do. If you have no empathy, thus no emotional consequence whatsoever, no matter what you do to someone else, then you have no limits. Anything goes, which is what we see. This is what this cabal does. Anything goes. The more suffering, the better from their point of view. And what this has done is filtered down into human society. There's lots of people in the world with their hearts open, yes, but there's a heck of a lot who've had them closed. For many reasons. through many experiences. And what happens is when you're coming from the heart, and this is driving your behavior and your perception, you are accessing expanded awareness that understands that this world is just a figment of our imagination. It looks at what appears to be individual people, labels, names, life stories, and it knows that actually they are just illusions. They're just experiences for our consciousness. They're not who we are. Who we are points of attention within this infinite state of awareness. And these labels in this world where everything appears to be apart from everything else are just illusory experiences for a tiny smear of what we call time before our consciousness moves elsewhere. And what this system has done is get us to totally and utterly self-identify with the labels of race and culture, of religion, of income bracket, sexuality, all of those things, when it's just a temporary experience. And because the heart knows it's an illusion, and we are all expressions of each other, all expressions of one infinite stream of consciousness, it doesn't see the divisions between us. It sees the connections, the unity. We are all expressions of each other. It knows that. This, decoding only the information that it's given, sees everything as apart from everything else. It self-identifies with labels. And through those self-identifications with labels, you have divide and rule. This is why we have all this conflict in the world. We're all each other. We fight each other for. Well, I'm a different colour to him. It's an illusion, mate. What are you talking about? Be over soon. I was in London on Saturday. I didn't go for this. I went to have a tour of Parliament. On a Saturday, you can go and have the public can go and have a tour of Parliament. So I went round. And then afterwards, I'm walking down Downing Street past the Prime Minister's residence. And on one side of the road were a lot of Chinese-looking people shouting and waving banners in support of the protesters in Hong Kong. On the other side of the road, disrupting the pavement and everything, causing chaos, were another group of Chinese-looking people who were hurling abuse the other way in support of the Chinese government over the protests in Hong Kong. And it went on. One shouted, the other shouted, they all shouted together, waving their bits of paper. As if, what's that going to do for a start? But what I was looking at was the head and the head abusing each other. There's no heart there. Another thing that comes out of heart is respect. Respect for another's right to an opinion, for another's right to freedom of expression. That comes from here. And it's interesting that one of the phrases we use for people who are extremely negative, empathy deleted. What do we call them? Heartless. Literally heartless, because this is closed. And you see heartless behavior all the time, which lacks empathy with those who have a different view. So in that situation outside Downing Street on Saturday, you had two sides, both coming from the head, who were hurling abuse at each other because they had no respect for the other's right to a different view. Oh, well, I think this and I support that. Oh, all right, well, I think this and I support that. Okay, well, you say what you've got to say and I'll say what I've got to say, and then people will have to make their minds up which they think is more valid. That's what you call mature, adult, heart-centered human discourse. You don't have to agree, but you see that everyone has a right to their opinion and for that right to be respected, even if you don't like the opinion. And so this concept of someone being heartless is much greater and much more expanded than just psychopaths who do horrific things, and violence and what have you. Call them heartless. People call governments heartless, of course, which is what they are. They're head institutions. That's what governments are. They're not heart institutions. They wouldn't act like they do if they were. But heartlessness, therefore, from my definition of heart, also applies to the censorship of Silicon Valley, or coming out of Silicon Valley. Those that control Facebook and Google, Twitter, Amazon, and those that run the hate groups claiming to be anti-hate groups that just want to stop anyone having a different opinion, they, from my perspective and definition of the heart, are heartless because they lack respect for all people to have a right to an opinion, and they lack empathy in any way with that opinion. They don't even look at it. It's different from theirs, so it must be wrong. There's no empathy. Oh, well, let me have a look at this, you know. And when they are silencing people and destroying them financially, like these ultra-Zionist hate groups try to do, where's the empathy with the effect they're having on these people? None. Of course, they're coming from the head, the heart, solid gold shut. If we had a society with its heart open, we would move phenomenally forward in our understanding of reality, because this is where the answers lie, not here. But also there would be no war, no hunger, no homelessness, no oppression, and no censorship of another's right to an opinion. None of those things can happen when the heart's open. But the head, you can justify anything to the head, because the brain's just processing the information it receives into a perception. And if you control the information, you're going to overwhelmingly control the perception, thus you're going to control the behavior. This is how it works. And from here comes what we call love. But love in its widest sense, in fact, we have become so disconnected from what love means, we tend to put words like unconditional in front of it to distance it from the perception of love that human society has taken on. A love that says, I love you if you're close to me, if you're attached to me, if I'm attracted to you, that I love my children. Good, right, so you should. But what about all the other children? that were not connected to you, who have different colour faces, different backgrounds, different cultures. How many people in America over the last, well, quite a few years now, who say they love their children, and I'm sure genuinely do, supported bombing innocent children in the Middle East? How many still do, while saying they love their children? Love and the heart does not select. It's love. It's empathy. Just expresses it to all people and all things. Imagine a world in which we did that. Would it be the same as the one we have now? Are you having a laugh? It would be transformed. Because what is what we call human society? It's the sum total of human perception which plays out as human behavior. So where's that perception going to come from? Here, isolated from this, or from this, in harmony and balance with this? Because the two societies, the two collective perceptions of that and that are going to be dramatically, dramatically different. And we are now moving into a period where on one side more and more people are starting to go there. They are starting to get it. They are starting to see that this is actually innate intelligence and this is learned intelligence. Very different. Because I can learn something that's a complete load of crap, but I still learned it. Just because you learn it doesn't mean it's true. You've just learned it, memorized it, been perceptually influenced by it. So this learns on the basis of the information it receives, and who controls that in this world, overwhelmingly. And this knows because it's connected to that level of awareness that does know. That's why the worlds that these two create are so dramatically different and would, if we went here, transform everything because of what will come from it. And we're heading, therefore, into a period rapidly where more and more people are going there and getting it. When people say, I woke up, what does that mean? It means they woke up from the program and started to see beyond the program. But on the other side, this cabal is trying more and more to close the heart down. And nothing closes the heart down quicker than fear. You don't have fear in your heart. You can't have fear in your heart. Your heart is love. What fear can do is close down your connection to the heart and out there. That's what they want. That's why they want people in fear and anxiety and depression. It closes the heart down. And one of the ways you can get in touch beyond this tiny band of frequency is to be in a place of quiet, in a place of silence, without all the interference and focus that sound and all this movement and everything can do to the brain, because the brain is so activated by the noise and the movement, and it's what you get in major urban centers, for instance, that it's so focused on that it can't hear this. So often it's good to get out into silence and solitude. Not forever, but enough to get in touch. But now, I've got a story here from this week. They are targeting solitude. They're targeting people that want to be alone with their own infinity. Modern medicine declares war on loneliness with drugs and bots, threatening introverts with extinction. And it points out how when people have gone crazy with guns, they've been described as loners. Loners, those dangerous types who actually enjoy solitude, are stigmatized, the article says, as an unpredictable weirdo who need to be brought into the fold. The man who shot up a Walmart in El Paso earlier this month was an extreme loner, according to media reports. Would we be reading about that if he was an extreme extrovert? The myth of the introvert killer pops up every time, even though it has been thoroughly debunked. And what they want to do now is use drugs to treat loneliness and people who are said to be introverted. Well, I've lived alone since, it must be at least 2006, 7, something like that. I spend most of my time alone, working, pondering. And I've never once been lonely. Loneliness and being alone are not the same thing, especially if you feel connected to everything. Being alone is not just not having people in the same house. And not feeling alone is not that either. You can feel alone in a room full of people, or you can feel not alone when you're by yourself, if you connect out there to other levels of reality beyond this tiny band of frequency. And this whole United Nations Agenda 2030, which includes, as I've been writing about for a long time, getting people out of rural areas into cities, which is going on all over the world. Absolutely getting people into these bustling, loud, chaotic cities out of the countryside is all part of this. And so is the agenda to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence. It's to bypass the heart, because this cabal knows that when this opens, game's over. Another one of its part of its armory is social media. Look at how heartless so much of social media is, as people get off on hurting other people. That's psychopathic behavior. And social media, when people are often hiding behind anonymous login names, is a means to bring out and accentuate and trigger this heartless, psychopathic, empathy deleted, respect deleted level of mind and low vibrational emotions, and to keep the heart shut. Because people opening their hearts is the worst nightmare of this cabal. Is why I say it's a bit sad that people are less interested in, it seems anyway, in terms of numbers, looking at this background to why the world is as it is and how we can change it than it is in looking only at the problem. People say there's no answer. There's nothing we can do. Well, no, there's not. If you're coming from the head only and you're coming from the five senses only, the cabal has all the aces. But go here, and everything that comes from that, and the game is over. Because the way that we have been collectively controlled is over. And, you know, when you look, for instance, at 5G, what is 5G? It's an electromagnetic frequency, like all of this stuff. And electromagnetic frequencies affect the electromagnetic frequencies of the body and of the human energy field. That's why it affects people so much in terms of health and psychology. And have no doubt that this 5G is also in part, because it's multi-leveled in terms of its planned effect, in part, it's designed to close down the heart by manipulating the human energy field. And people might say, oh, well, you know, it's all esoteric rubbish, mate. Navel contemplating. But look at what being directed and dominated by the head and the gut has done. It's got us where vast, vast numbers of human beings don't want to be. How can going here make it any worse? It can't. It can only make it dramatically better, because this won't accept the injustice and the imbalance that this somehow justifies to itself. We move from a head-dominated society to a heart-dominated society, or a heart-led society. Or we'll just go on spiraling down into the abyss that's been long planned. And that abyss is total and utter human control, not least by AI. Go to the heart and everything changes. And I'll tell you something else before I end. That going here changes. This has no fear. This knows that we're all expressions, infinite expressions, eternal expressions of one infinite consciousness. And this is just a brief experience in the illusory world of the illusory physical. It knows there's nothing to fear. What's the worst that can happen? You leave the body and continue your exploration of forever, forever. Cool, I'm terrified. And the other thing about the heart is that we'll always do what it knows to be right, irrespective of the consequences. It won't think of consequences. It won't think what will happen to me if I do what I believe to be right or what I know to be right. No, it will just do it. And this whole cabal controls humanity by intimidating humanity into acquiescence and compliance through fear of not doing so. This doesn't fear that. And so not only does the heart consciousness, the heart perception, see all humanity as important, and relevant and to be respected. It will not be intimidated into compliance and into silence. Put those two things together, and the two pillars of cabal control, which is people complying with what they don't want to do because they fear not complying. And two, people will always do what they know to be right, irrespective of whether they think it's right for them in the moment. It always is if they do what they know to be right. And instead of saying, how does this affect me? This says, what is just, what is fair in this situation? Now you put those two things together. No longer fearing compliance or not complying. No longer fearing the consequences of not knowing or doing what you know to be right. And at the same time, always doing things on the basis of what you believe and know to be right, to be just, and to be fair. What a world that would be compared with the one we have now. And all it takes is a little journey with a extraordinary impact from here to here. It's time to give it a try. Because the alternative hasn't worked, has it? See you soon.